I was homeless for 2 years because my daughter-in-law secretly sold my house. I lived under a bridge and became very ill. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law brainwashed my son, making him think I was in a nursing home. But now she begs from passersby on the street. I tossed her a few coins and pretended I didn't know her. I saw her before she saw me, knees tucked under a filthy blanket, paper cup in hand, eyes scanning every passing pair of shoes like she was trying to guess which ones belonged to God. I dropped 3 quarters, a nickel, and 2 pennies into her cup without breaking stride. They clinked loud enough that she flinched. "Bless you," she said to my back. I didn't say a word. It was the first time in 2 years that Kari needed something from me and couldn't take it. I'm 60, Arizona-born, most recently bridge-bred. I wasn't always a woman who counted bus transfers like beads on a rosary. I used to have a little 2-bedroom in a 55-plus community in Mesa, beige stucco with a bougainvillea that ignored the HOA's obsession with uniform appearance. I retired early after 35 years as a school secretary. Attendance charts, aspirin tablets, broken hearts, the whole parade. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was tidy. I had a paid-off house, a drip system that actually worked, and enough saved that Social Security took the edge off. My son, Ethan, married Kari 5 years ago. Kari had that smile, the kind that never reached her eyes, but somehow still convinced you to hand her your car keys and your tax return. She called me Mom from day one and told me I looked amazing for 60, like it was a diagnosis. She worked as an assistant property manager for a company that handled half the apartments in the East Valley. She knew rents, leases, evictions, how to make a problem look like your fault. At first, I was grateful. Ethan had always been an easy target for charismatic people. Kari asked for small things that felt like big kindnesses. Could she borrow my printer? Could I co-sign their Costco membership? Could she use my address for some mail just for a week while their mailbox key was lost? I thought I was being generous. What I was being was scoped. 2 years ago, June, the heat felt wrong. Phoenix heat is always a slap, but this was a chokehold. I'd been coughing for weeks and chalked it up to summer dust and the tiny old dog 2 doors down who considered my yard his bathroom. One afternoon, I walked to the mailbox and woke up looking at a paramedic whose eyebrows were knitted together like he was sewing me shut. Pneumonia, dehydration, low sodium. I spent 6 days at Banner Baywood hooked up to things that beeped, as if they were counting down to something. Kari visited once with a helium balloon that said, "Get well soon," like it had been recycled from someone's 3rd-grade tonsillectomy. Ethan came twice and looked like he had been coached. Too cheerful, too careful. He said, "We've been talking, Mom. You're not great at taking care of yourself. Maybe a short rehab stay, just until it cools down." I told him I was fine. My numbers were fine. My nurse, a woman with arms solid as fence posts, told me I'd be discharged in a day or 2. I called my own Uber on my own phone. I wanted my own bed, my own coffee mug with the chip on the rim like a snaggletooth. When I got home, my house key didn't work. Not the back door, not the garage, not the little sliding screen I used when I forgot the first 2. My front door mat, a hokey welcome I'd kept to annoy the HOA, was gone. A floral mat that said, "Bless this mess," lay there like a joke on me. Through the front window, the furniture was different, too white, too staged. A bowl of fake lemons sat on my kitchen island where my mail sorter used to be. My mail? My mail had stopped. I stood there blinking, heat pounding at the back of my neck. A white SUV with a magnetic sign rolled up saying, "Saguaro Realty, open house today." The driver, a woman in 2 stiff curls, smiled like we were already friends. "We're just starting. Come on in. Are you the neighbor?" I was not the neighbor. I was the owner, or I had been. But when I told her that, she thumbed through a folder thick with glossy pictures and said, very gently, like you talk to people who hear voices, "Ma'am, the owner is a trust. It's already closed. We're reselling." I called Ethan, straight to voicemail. I called Kari, straight to voicemail. I called the police, civil matter. I called my HOA. They chirped that they had the new owner's signature on the packet already. Welcome to the community. I stood in my own driveway with a hospital bracelet still crinkling on my wrist while strangers padded through my living room in their socks, commenting loudly about the good bones. For the next week, I traveled between a church basement, a motel that smelled like fried desperation, and the city library. After that, my money ran out. The motel clerk politely told me I had to check out. The church basement had rules I didn't fully understand. And the bridge didn't care as long as you didn't sprawl in someone's favored corner. I was 60 and sleeping under a concrete lizard belly. If you haven't been homeless in Phoenix, let me tell you, every surface is either hot or dirty or both. And water, which used to be an afterthought, starts to feel like currency, medicine, prayer. The sun turns your skin into paper and your brain into static. The kindness of strangers is a warm blanket. The cruelty of strangers is a storm. Both are unpredictable. People imagine homelessness as a failure of will. Actually, it's a failure of paperwork. Without an address, you can't get your ID renewed. Without ID, you can't apply for anything. Without applications, you have no shelter. And when your ID and Social Security and Medicare correspondence are all being handled by a young woman who tells the world you're in a nursing home and can't be reached, you might as well be dead. Carrie told Ethan I was in a facility in Surprise. She told my church I needed privacy. She told my neighbor Judy that I'd moved to be closer to services. She told the mail carrier to forward my letters to a P.O. box for the conservator. She made herself the oxygen I couldn't breathe without. I learned quickly, because I had to. I kept my hospital discharge papers wrapped in a zip-top bag, tucked in the inner pocket of the Goodwill jacket a volunteer had handed me, like she was giving me a ticket to a different life. I rotated through library branches to charge my phone and read. I held onto that phone like a raft. Even as the screen cracked and the case peeled back, it held my contacts, my calendar, my proof I existed. For 2 months, I coughed like I was trying to shake loose a building, and I watched the scaffolding of my previous life get dismantled. My bank app said my mortgage payoff fund, just a cushion I'd kept, old habit, was drained. My electric account was closed. My water bill, final notice, was paid by someone. The Maricopa County Recorder's website, which I found after a librarian named Trey showed me how to dig, listed my parcel number under a different name, Canyon Orchard Family Trust. The deed was a quitclaim, recorded 6 days after I went to the hospital. On that deed, a signature that was supposed to be mine. I know my hand. My R has a hooked leg. My S trails. The signature on that deed looked like it wanted to be me when it grew up. The notary stamp belonged to one C. Ames, mobile notary. The address was a UPS store. The date and time were 2:17 p.m. on the day I had a catheter and an IV and an oxygen tube looping us all together like puppets. That was the day I stopped crying and started writing. I bought a cheap spiral notebook and a ballpoint pen with the last $3 I had. I wrote down every date I could reconstruct. The hospital admission, the call logs where my phone tried Ethan twice, the day Judy saw a moving truck, the day the water meter stopped. I wrote down names and made space beside them. Carrie, Ethan, C. Ames, notary, Saguaro Realty, agent, Canyon Orchard Family Trust, trustee name unknown, title company listed in the resale, Desert Title, LLC. I went to the adult services desk at the library and asked if there was legal aid for seniors who'd been, screwed? The librarian didn't flinch. She printed a list. The second number actually picked up. Community Legal Services, Elder Law. They asked me questions slow and careful. Had anyone obtained a power of attorney for you? Did you sign any documents? Was there a notary present? Do you have capacity now? I wanted to laugh. I've got enough capacity to alphabetize your office if you want, I told the intake lady, and she laughed, and then I cried again, because kindness is dangerous when you're dry as tinder. They made me an appointment. I showed up in a shirt with a coffee stain that looked like Ohio. They didn't blink. An attorney named Rosa, with hair in a firm bun and eyes that watched like hawks do, took my notebook and read. She didn't rush. She didn't explain my situation like I was a child. She said one phrase that cracked something open in my chest. This looks like deed fraud and financial exploitation. Rosa went to the recorder's site herself and printed the deed. She circled the notary stamp. She asked if I could obtain my hospital chart for that day, provable proof I wasn't signing anything. She asked if I knew any notaries. I did not. She wrote letters while I watched, like a magician pulling rabbits. One to the notary demanding a copy of his journal entry for that day and signature. One to the title company that handled the resale, putting them on notice this transfer was disputed. One to the Attorney General's office, Elder Abuse, Unit. One to Maricopa County Attorney. We're going to file for a temporary injunction, a lis pendens on the property, she said, pen underlining the words for me. It won't kick people out, but it will put clouds on any future sale. Then we get your identity flagged with the recorder so you're notified before any new documents are recorded. Too late now, but useful later. And we'll open a criminal report. This is going to be slow, and it's going to hurt, but it's not impossible. The phrase, not impossible, tastes like steak when you've been eating trail mix. During those weeks, I stashed my notebook at the library whenever I could, wrapping it in a plastic grocery bag and slipping it between oversized atlases where no one looked. I saved bus receipts. I created a paper person where my real life used to be. I learned where to get a sack lunch without anyone's sermon attached. I figured out the night the sprinklers under the bridge turned on and how to wedge myself against a pillar so I wouldn't wake up damp. One morning, the notary responded. Or rather, his attorney did. They sent a copy of the journal page. It showed a Jane M. Sloan, me, signing a quitclaim deed in a Starbucks near Dobson and Baseline at 2:05 p.m. It listed my ID as an Arizona driver's license with a number that was close to mine, off by one digit. It listed person known to me and credible witnesses, boxes empty. A scrawl of a signature that was supposed to be my own. The notary had taken a thumbprint, some do as an added precaution. The print, we could see even with our bare eyes, looked like a smudgy spiral, not a unique anything. I was in a hospital bed at 2:05 p.m. There were nurses who could testify, there was a medication log, there was a pulse ox reading that wouldn't have lasted a walk to Starbucks, let alone signing complex documents. Rosa said, "We can work with this." Carrie finally called me back 3 weeks after I first tried her. By now, the open house had closed, the house had resold, the new owners had painted the walls a shade of gray my neighbor Judy described as prison small talk. Carrie, bright as a bell, chirped, "We've been so worried. Ethan thought you were at Sierra Pines. They said you checked yourself out. Where are you staying? We can pick you up." I recorded to call. In Arizona, that's legal. I told her I was okay. I asked her where she was. She said, running errands, like the vague alibi it was. I asked her if she'd been to a notary lately. She paused, a flicker I felt even over the line. Why? I said, just curious, and even I admired my composure. Rosa says hello. She hung up. Now, there's a part of me that wants to fast forward this story into a neat bow. Lady loses everything, lady gets everything back, villain is handcuffed in a shower of glitter and justice. Real life is slower and stickier. Real life is forms. Rosa filed for the injunction and the lis pendens. The court date was 2 months out. We gathered affidavits. I got my full medical record on a CD that I had to pay $18 for. The irony of paying to prove I couldn't physically sign something made me laugh in that scary way that makes the person next to you move seats. I went to the county recorder in person to put a fraud alert on my name. A woman behind bulletproof glass, nails like polished pearls, looked me up and down and said, "We see more of this than you'd think." She slid a brochure under the glass like a placemat. "You can sign up for email alerts too." I didn't have consistent email. I made one in the library that afternoon with a password no one would guess because it was only funny to me. Not dead yet #60. Rosa sent a preservation letter to Desert Title. Desert Title called back with a different tone than I expected. They were worried about liability. They had closed the resale with Canyon Orchard Family Trust as the seller and a young couple as the buyer, cute as anything, both teachers. Desert Title had a file, escrow instructions, the trust document, thin as tissue, the check from the sale issued to Canyon Orchard Trust Family Trust, trustee Carrie L. Brooks. I didn't know Carrie's middle name was Lynn. Pastor said that was a Lynn move. Desert Title coughed up copies. The trust was barely a trust. It was a cut-and-paste job. Stamped by a notary I recognized. C. Ames. My stomach felt like it was sliding off a cliff. Rose's eyebrows arched. Same notary, different day. Interesting. We sent all of it to the county attorney and the AG's elder abuse unit. We also filed a civil suit. Quiet title, fraud, conversion, unjust enrichment. The complaint looked like a term paper written by someone who had learned to hate the sound of their own polite words. Carrie was listed as a defendant. Ethan was not, yet. I asked Rosa why. Because being married to a shark doesn't make you a shark, she said, and I felt my lungs loosen just a bit. I still loved my son, even if it was a tattered love like an old quilt with sun rot. Then came the thing that made the case glow under blacklight. Rosa subpoenaed the notary's full journal for the 2-week period around the deed. When it arrived, we sat at a long table under bad fluorescent lighting and read, page after page of signatures. Seller identity verified. Quitclaim. Trust doc. The same two credible witnesses named over and over. Different last names, but the same phone number. The notary's log had gaps where fees were scribbled out and replaced with higher numbers. A handful of entries had the same witness phone number as Carrie's work line. Small, almost a coincidence, unless you believed in magic. I don't. Rose's paralegal, a young man with an accountant's attention to boredom, plugged the numbers into People Finder databases. 2 of the witnesses were listed at the same address, a short-term rental near Carrie's office. The credit card used to pay for the notary service on mydeednow.com. The statement was redacted, but the last 4 digits matched a card I'd once used to buy Ethan and Carrie a baby shower gift before they lost the pregnancy, and Carrie told me I made it about me. The card number belonged to the same bank as Carrie's. A web patterned out. At the center, a smile that never reached its eyes. I was still under a bridge when Rosa called to say the county attorney wanted to meet. She said, "They're assigning an investigator. He's former Mesa PD. He knows this terrain. Be at my office at 2. I washed in the restroom of a Family Dollar with a bar of soap I'd been rationing like gold. I finger-combed my hair. I wore my least wrinkled shirt. I took 2 buses and walked 4 blocks in shoes with one failing sole. The investigator, Leon, was 50s, a man whose shirts were always one button too tight at the throat. He asked questions softly, like he didn't want to scare the deer away. He took my statements about the hospital timeline. He asked permission to pull my records, my phone logs, my bank statements from the months around it. He asked if I had ever given Carrie a power of attorney. I said no. I gave her a spare key once. 2 very different things. Leon squeezed his hands together. He said, "We're going to look at the notary first, weakest link. If that cracks, the rest will follow. But I want to warn you, criminal cases are slow. Restitution is a question mark. You might not get the house back if the current buyers are bona fide and had title insurance, but we can hold people accountable." It mattered that he didn't say, "We'll try." He said, "We can." Can is a word to live on. In the meantime, I had to live. The church I used to attend thought I'd chosen Rahab over them. When I walked in one Sunday, a woman I knew from the knitting circle hugged me like I was a ghost. They made phone calls that afternoon. Everyone was scandalized that they had been out of the loop. Carrie's narrative cracked in 3 hours of gossip where my version couldn't seep through in 3 months. The pastor, nice man, fond of metaphors, came with me to the police precinct and stood while I gave yet another report, which made exactly no difference until it did. Carrie's employer, the big management company, hosted a charity 5K for housing insecurity at Tempe Town Lake that fall.
I saw the flyer on the library bulletin board and almost laughed out loud. It felt cosmic, the kind of irony even people who don't believe in God can respect. Rosa shook her head at my delight. "Don't touch the employer yet," she said. "We want their cooperation when subpoenas go out. We don't want them circling the wagons." I wasn't going to do anything, I lied. Rosa, who could smell a lie a week old, arched an eyebrow, but let it slide.
A month later, Leon sat me and Rosa down. "The notary's in trouble," he said simply. "We interviewed him. His story changed 3 times. He couldn't identify you from a photo lineup. His journal has irregularities. We got his GPS pings from his phone with a warrant. He wasn't anywhere near that Starbucks when he claims he notarized your deed. He was in Queen Creek, buying mulch. He knows he's cooked." "What does that get us?" I asked, trying to pry hope loose from whatever it had stuck to this time. "A plea, probably," Leon said. "And if he flips, he'll give us the person who hired him, the person who brought him the documents. He says he was doing a favor for a client who said an old lady couldn't travel and wanted to sign at home. He can't explain the hospital record we showed him." He paused. "We also found something else. The trust that sold your house? It was opened at a bank where Kari is listed on the signature card. And there's a deposit the day after the sale, cashier's check from Desert Title, then ATM withdrawals, then a wire to a down payment on a new SUV, then several transactions to a cosmetic med spa. Of course the money went to Lips. This is where the story usually gets simple. You call the cops, they put her in cuffs, roll credits. But Kari wasn't an idiot. She had cleaned surfaces. She used other people's phones. She signed nothing with her full name if she could help it. When the subpoena arrived at her employer, she hadn't known yet. Leon used their compliance worry to get data before the rumor mill fed her. Call logs, calendar appointments, parking garage entries, security cameras of her walking in with a man we learned was the notary on the day the trust account was opened. Rosa also went civil on her like a harp. We found an accountant who liked to carve numbers into smaller numbers until they confessed. He turned the money that had flowed through that trust into a story even a judge could follow. Ethan called me one evening, voice wobbly as a fawn. "Mom, Kari says you're trying to ruin her." "I'm trying to unfry my house," I said. "Ethan, where did you think I was?" His silence was a sheet being pulled off a piece of furniture that turned out to be a mirror. "She told me Sierra Pines. She said you didn't want visitors. She said the calls would confuse you. She had paperwork. She showed me a letter from your doctor." "No, she showed you stationery," I said gently. "I have the real chart. I was never in Sierra Pines. I was under the 202. He cried. Big, messy, gorgeous tears. Because tears, when they're honest, are absolutely beautiful. Then he told me things I already knew and things I didn't. How Kari had made him sign things because we're married, it's our fight. How she had changed the bank password and said, "Don't worry your mother about this. She can't keep track of anything." How she had told his friends that I was declining, made it clear they should give him space out of respect. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "You could have asked me," I said, and then hated myself for the crack in my voice. "You could have come yourself." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. Don't say that to me. Say it to a judge." The criminal case started with a grand jury, because that's how the county attorney likes to do it. Quiet, tidy. The first we heard that it had gone our way was when Leon called, then Rosa, then my church friend who reads the public filings for sport. Kari was indicted for fraudulent schemes and artifices, theft, identity theft, and conspiracy with elder abuse enhancements. The notary took a plea to forgery and agreed to testify. There were conditions. There are always conditions. Kari was arrested at work. Do I know this because I was there? No, I know it because people talk and her workplace had more glass walls than sense. She was walked out past a poster that said, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching." The internet had a day. The civil case shadowed the criminal one. Desert Title settled quietly with the teachers who'd bought my house. Their title insurance would sort it out. The teachers kept their house.
That was both fair and a gut punch. I did not get my house back because the law can't rewind everything, only some things. But the judge granted restitution and a civil judgment, and Kari's wages, when she would have them, were going to be pretty light for a long time. The trust account was frozen. The SUV, seized. The med spa money, gone into someone's face. You can't claw filler back out with an order. Meanwhile, I climbed out of that concrete belly one rung at a time. A shelter bed, then a subsidized studio with air that didn't smell like other people's sleep. A case manager who looked like my daughter would have if I'd had one. A practical braid, a no-nonsense clipboard, a belief in me that made me square my shoulders when I wanted to fold. Pastor rallied the church to furnish my place. Judy brought me cuttings from my old bougainvillea, like a piece of old life that refused to die.
Carrie's arraignment came and went. The plea negotiations started. Ethan filed for separation. He told me he'd moved in with a friend. He said Carrie blamed me, Rosa, the system, the notary, her mother, the cold brew that day, God. She didn't blame Ethan, which was interesting. She didn't blame herself, which was unsurprising. The day I saw her on the street was 3 months after her bond was posted, and a week after her employer, in a press release that may as well have been titled, "Don't Hit Us," said they had terminated her pending legal matters. Carrie always thought pending meant it will go away if you wait. She had learned the other definition, still coming for you. I was leaving the bus stop near the courthouse. She was on the corner, sunglasses too big for her face, cup out, hair clean enough that I knew she was still staying with someone willing to give her a shower and an alibi. She was saying God bless, like she believed in him. I have more religious people in my life than believer bones, but something in me uncoiled at the sight of that posture. She had spent 2 years as the oxygen. Now she was airless. I dropped my coins. She thanked me. I kept walking. That's the scene people fixate on when I tell this story, the coin drop. They want to know why I didn't spit, or why I didn't stop and sermonize, or why I didn't scream until the pigeons fled. But this wasn't my finale. This was an intermission between storms. You don't waste your voice screaming at the thunder. You save it for the testimony. Because if there's one thing 35 years as a school secretary taught me, it's that the real tower is in the file drawer. You want to teach a bully a lesson? You don't throw a punch. You build a paper trail so clean the principal can see herself in it. And Carrie had left me a breadcrumb trail from a Starbucks to a bank to a Botox syringe. All I had to do was follow it, one recorded affidavit at a time. The weeks leading into the hearing were a march of details. Rosa coached me on testifying. Answer what's asked, not what's felt. Don't let your voice rise like a question. Let the gaps in their stories speak. Leon prepped me for the cross I'd get from her defense. They'd try to make me look confused, make my hospital stay seem optional, make the notary's sloppiness the only crime. He'll try to separate her actions from the result, he said. Our job is to thread them back together. Ethan sat behind me in every meeting, quiet, wrecked, determined. He brought me a little plastic container of cut watermelon to every appointment like it was a ritual. Cool, sweet, consistent. Humility arrives in strange fruit. The defense, a man with pocket squares that looked like flags of rich countries, filed a motion to suppress the notary's journal, citing technicalities that sounded impressive until you realized they boiled down to, our guy kept bad records and we don't want you to notice. The judge, a woman who has never once looked fully impressed in her life, denied it gently and thoroughly. The defense also moved to exclude the bank records because they are prejudicial. The judge smiled, the way you do when a child tries to negotiate bedtime with a monologue about the Constitution. I didn't sleep the night before the first evidentiary hearing. I traced the cracks in the ceiling of the apartment the church had helped me secure and counted backward from 100 so many times I ended up in negatives.
I put my discharge bracelet on my nightstand, not because I needed to prove anything to myself, but because it reminded me of the baseline truth. I was here, I had survived, I had numbers and times and names, and even if the court decided not to see them, they would exist, and I wouldn't be any less real. I wore my good shoes, the ones Judy swore made me look like I had somewhere to go. I sat at the table with Rosa, and when the judge walked in and the bailiff sang his monotone opera, I felt my heartbeat slow. That's how you know you're ready, when the room that can decide your life makes your pulse settle instead of spike. The prosecutor started with the notary. He walked him through his journal like a bored tourist through a museum he'd already visited. Is this your stamp? Yes. Is this your signature? Yes. Were you at Starbucks on June 10th at 2:05? I don't recall. Were you at Lowe's in Queen Creek buying mulch? I don't recall. They put up the phone pings on a screen. They put up the receipt. They put up the Starbucks CCTV, which showed no sign of me, but did show a woman in an oversized sun hat and big sunglasses handing a folder to a man who looked like the notary's cousin. When the prosecutor asked, "Do you know the defendant, Ms. Brooks?" The notary swallowed. "I've met her. Professionally."
At the recess, while defense counsel conferred in a huddle of expensive fabric, Rosa turned to me. "This is going well," she said, which is lawyer for pop the champagne. I didn't relax. I have sat through too many school board meetings where the agenda shifts under your feet and suddenly you're being blamed for a thing you didn't do, while the man who did it smiles beside a PowerPoint. After lunch, they called me. I swore in. I sat. I told the truth. I didn't say the word bridge because the judge didn't need my tragedy. She needed my timeline. I made them see the catheter and the IV without describing the indignity. I made them watch me try a locked key in a door that used to sigh open. I made them hear the sound of strangers' feet on my carpet. I made them count the days between the deed and the discharge and the open house sign. I made them hold the pencil while I pointed to the hospital chart timestamps. If you've never wrung power out of dates and times, try it. It is alchemy. The defense tried me with questions soft as velvet and sharp as hooks. "Miss Sloan, is it possible you discussed transferring your home to a trust before your hospitalization?" "No." "Is it possible you signed a document you didn't fully understand?" "No." "Is it possible you mistook Carrie's concern for control?" "No." "Isn't it true you're estranged from your son?" "No, although the crack there showed." When it was over, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt squeezed, like a tube that had given up the last stripe of paste. But I stood up steady. Ethan squeezed my shoulder with a hand that shook. The judge took it under advisement because judges are allergic to immediate gratification. The criminal case's wheels kept turning. The civil case waited in a room down the hall like a quieter hurricane. 2 days later, Rosa called. "Motion to bind over is granted," she said, voice even. "We're going to trial." She paused. "And Jane, the judge's minute entry specifically mentioned the credibility of your timeline and the implausibility of the notary's account. She used the word orchestration. That word will carry. Orchestration. Music, but criminal. She had named what it was. I slept that night like someone had untied a knot to the base of my skull. The next day, I went to the library and returned 2 books that had lived under my bed like talismans. One on tenant rights, which I kept reading like a ghost, shaking a door that wasn't mine anymore. And one on desert gardening, because bougainvillea or not, I wanted my new windows to look out at something that insisted on blooming. I had my breath back. I had paper. I had patience. And in my pocket,
I had a single quarter I hadn't dropped into Carrie's cup. Not because I wanted to keep it from her, because I had better use for it. I fed that quarter into the library copier like it was a slot machine and watched it spit out the first page of a complaint to the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Carrie wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was a licensed assistant in a business that lives and dies by trust. ADRE has ugly teeth when it wants to. Audits, revocations, public discipline that follows you like a shadow at noon. I filed 3 complaints that day. One with ADRE against Carrie for unlicensed activities beyond the scope of her role and for participating in a fraudulent conveyance. One with the National Notary Association about Mr. Mulch, and one with the State Board for Title Agents naming Desert Title's escrow officer as a witness. The forms weren't poetry, but I know how to fill in boxes. 35 years of attendance records taught me the art of the quiet paper cut. Rosa helped me add exhibits. My hospital timestamps, the recorder's deed, the notary's journal page, the Starbucks footage still. We overnighted the packets, because government attention, like a cat, comes faster when you rattle the treat bag. I also put freezes on all 3 credit bureaus, filed an IRS identity theft affidavit, and had the recorder add a property fraud alert on my name. The past had already happened. The future, though, was going to have to get past me. Leon called with news that made my fingers go numb. He said, "We found Carrie's work email where she scheduled the notary. She asked him to keep the journal vague because of a sensitive family situation. And we got security footage of her meeting him outside her office garage the day the trust account opened. It wasn't a murder weapon. It was better. It was context." Ethan started showing up with watermelon and a jaw set like he was chewing through guilt. He switched his phone plan off the family share Carrie controlled. He closed the card she'd given her self-authorized user status on, and he met with Leon voluntarily and told him everything he'd seen, how she'd coached him to say I was forgetful, how she'd had him notarize a letter he never read for Mom's file, and how she'd brought home a bag of mail rubber-banded like a thesis and told him it was medical.
"Do you hate me?" he asked one night, shoulders up around his ears. "I hate what you didn't see," I said. "I hated what I didn't see, too." He cried. I let him. Then I handed him a pen and pointed at a blank page. "You're going to write a statement, and you're going to be precise," I said. He did. ARDE moved fast for a state agency. They opened an investigation, asked for Kari's personnel file, and subpoenaing her emails. Desert Title, sensing the current, started swimming with us. Their compliance officer called Rosa and said the words, "We'd like to cooperate." Companies don't like to cooperate. They do it to survive. In the meantime, I had a life to reacquire. Social Security had my checks on autopilot, thank God, and the payroll taxes of my younger self. The city's senior housing waitlist called my number by some miracle and Rosa's letterhead, and I got a studio off Country Club with a window that faced a mural of saguaros at sunset. The rent was a number I could say without my stomach dropping. The first thing I plugged in was a fan. The second was a tiny fountain I found at Goodwill that made water sound like forgiveness. Kari's arraignment turned into status conferences and continuances, the legal system's lullaby. Leon told me to expect a plea deal talk. Prosecutors leaning toward offering 5 to 7 on fraudulent schemes if she admits to the elder enhancement, he said. Restitution, forfeiture, revocation of any real estate-related licenses. She'll fight the elder part. They always do. "I'm literally 60, I said. My bones don't lie." At the next hearing, the judge set a trial date and a settlement conference. Kari showed up in a beige suit that used to look like money and now looked like cardboard. She didn't scan the room for me. She looked at the floor like answers might be written there. I didn't want a courtroom catfight. I wanted consequences that lasted longer than the day's news. So while Rosa and Leon prepped for trial, I did the kind of revenge people underestimate. I set about collapsing Kari's credibility in every system that had once given her the benefit of the doubt. I pulled her public disciplinary history, clean, of course, and then I added my complaint to the pile where the next employer would find it. I sent a copy of the indictment to the property management company's compliance department, not because I wanted clicks, but because tenants deserve to know when the person holding their deposits thinks trust is a printable word. I sat with a reporter from a local station after Rosa butted the questions. We stuck to facts. Deed fraud is rising, seniors are targets, here's how to lock your records, here's the recorder's alert page, here's the AG hotline. My face was on the 6 o'clock news for 3 seconds under the caption, Elder Fraud Survivor. I didn't look broken. I looked like a woman who would alphabetize your soul. The settlement conference came and went without a deal. Kari wanted probation. The prosecutor wanted prison. The judge scheduled trial for late spring and told everyone to clear their calendars. The notary signed his plea and handed over his phone, his memories, and his dignity in exchange for a lighter landing. He named Kari as the coordinator. He named the credible witnesses as temps from a gig app she paid in cash. He named the UPS box she used to make herself look real. Ethan filed for divorce and served her at the courthouse doors. He cried afterward in the parking structure where the acoustics make everybody sound lonelier. I sat with him on a concrete bumper stop and held his hand. You're allowed to love someone and not let them ruin you, I said. Consider this your continuing education. Trial prep ate February like a hungry dog. Rosa's paralegal turned my binder into a tabbed cathedral. Leon walked me through questions in a conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and nerves. The prosecutor, a woman with a voice that could slice a ham, drilled me on just the facts, she said. Let emotion leak through the facts, don't lead with it. Juries trust math. The week before trial, ARDE issued an emergency order suspending Kari from any real estate activity pending outcome. It was written in the dry language of bureaucrats who are only funny by accident. Respondents' continued practice constitutes an immediate threat to the public. I printed it and taped it inside a kitchen cabinet like a prayer.
Day 1. Jury selection. A dentist who hated paperwork, a retiree who used to notarize PTA permission slips, a young woman who rented and had fought with a landlord, a man whose mother had dementia. The defense struck the renters and the PTA lady. We ended up with a mix of people who looked like the bus on a weekday. Tired, busy, skeptical, hopeful in that very American way that doesn't admit hope. The state opened with the notary. If you've never watched a man explain his own dishonesty to 12 strangers while sweating through a tie, bring popcorn. He pointed at Exhibit 12, journal page, Exhibit 19, Starbucks footage, Exhibit 27, GPS pings, and Exhibit 31, his bank record showing a Venmo from Carrie labeled coffee. He looked smaller every hour. The defense tried to paint him as a rogue who framed poor Carrie to save himself. The prosecutor let the jury watch the word rogue bounce off his mulch receipt. They brought in the escrow officer from Desert Title, embarrassed and meticulous. She explained chain of title, earnest money, trust documents, and the moment her stomach fell out when Rosa's letter arrived. She described the trust Carrie presented, 2 pages stapled to a wish, and how, in hindsight, the red flags were a parade. She didn't hide her own fault. Juries like grown-ups. Then it was my turn. I told the story the way it lived in my bones. The hospital buzzers, the wrong doormat, the fake lemons, the mailbox with nothing in it, because I had been erased. I kept my voice level. I thought about the copier at the library and the quiet strength of quarters. The defense tried to float a story about me planning to move into assisted living and gifting the house to a family trust to avoid estate taxes. It collapsed under the weight of my $1,128 monthly Social Security statement. They tried to suggest I had once asked Carrie to help me with my will.
I asked her for a ride to bingo, I said. The laughter soft. Laughter is a verdict practicing. Day 3, the prosecutor put up a calendar with Carrie's digital footprints. Carrie's lawyers went pale in that particular lawyer way they pretend is anger. A row of timestamps. 1:47 p.m. Notary texted, here. 1:49. Carrie badged in at garage. 1:53. Surveillance still of Carrie in sunglasses with a folder. 2:05. Notary's journal claims Starbucks. 2:17. My ID pump registers medication change. You could slide a ruler from their lie to my vein. Day 4. The defense put Carrie on the stand. I didn't expect that. Maybe they believed her smile would still work on 12 people who had already been fed a diet of receipts. She was polished, careful, practiced. She said misunderstanding, like it was a life raft. She said family, like it was a leash. She said I never meant, like intent was a magic word. The prosecutor's cross was surgical. You opened a trust account. Yes. You were the trustee. Yes. You deposited a check from Desert Title into that account. Yes. You bought a vehicle the next day. We needed reliable transportation. For the med spa, did your mother-in-law also need reliable lips? The courtroom shifted. Even the stenographer's fingers paused. Carrie's smile cracked. She said, I was under a lot of stress. So you stole an elderly woman's home, the prosecutor said, voice quiet. That relieved your stress? I didn't steal. It was messy. Messy, the prosecutor repeated, letting the word hang between us all like a smell. Closing arguments were plain. The state drew a straight line from my hospital bed to Carrie's trust account. The defense tried to scribble loops around intent and complication. The judge's instructions were crisp. Deliberations took 6 hours and a sandwich. Guilty on fraudulent schemes and artifices. Guilty on theft. Guilty on taking the identity of another. Guilty on conspiracy. Elder abuse enhancement, true. Carrie didn't look at me when the clerk read the verdicts. Ethan did. His face was relief and grief got married. Sentencing took another month. I spent those weeks making lists. Utilities in my name, doctors to reestablish care with, plants to buy that could survive my attention span. I went to a senior legal clinic to make a real will with a real attorney whose notary held a real stamp, and I signed the papers with the satisfaction of a woman cutting a ribbon on a new bridge. The day of sentencing, the courtroom was colder than usual. The prosecutor recommended 7 years. The defense begged for probation, citing no prior record and community ties and stress. The judge, who had the patience of a cactus, listened to everyone and then spoke to Carrie like a principal to a kid who finally realized summer school was not optional.
You exploited systems designed to help families care for elders, she said. You weaponized trust. You did it with sophistication. The harm is not just financial, it's existential. She sentenced Kari to 5 years in the Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a lifetime prohibition from any fiduciary or real estate-related employment. She signed orders forfeiting the SUV and the remaining trust funds. She granted my civil judgment as part of the restitution plan, which meant every tax refund Kari ever sees will bleed toward me until the number is satisfied. Audrey made the suspension a permanent revocation, posted on their website with a case number that will stalk her job searches like an unpaid bill. The notary lost his commission. Desert Title paid out the teachers and ate the deductible. Their compliance officer sent me a thank you card for making us better, which is corporate for you scared us straight. Ethan and I started seeing a counselor who specializes in families scammed by their own. We learned words like coercive control and FOG, fear, obligation, guilt. He learned to stop apologizing and start repairing. Repair looks like showing up. It looks like driving me to my pulmonary checkups and sitting through Medicare hold music. It looks like changing my AC filter without being asked. The reporter did a follow-up.
Elder fraud case ends in prison term. The comments were what comments are. Half compassion, half people insisting they'd never be fooled. I didn't read them. I wrote a list for the library bulletin board instead. How to sign up for recorder alerts, how to freeze credit, how to check your deed online. The reference librarian asked if I'd teach a little class on a Tuesday. I did. 8 people came, 6 women and 2 men, and all of them carried envelopes of just-in-case papers like talismans. My revenge wasn't the gavel, it was the class. 3 months after sentencing, I ran into Kari's mother outside of Fry's. She glanced at my cart, at the bagged lettuce and the on-sale coffee and the tiny red geranium I didn't need but wanted. "Happy?" she asked, sneer barely veiled. "I'm housed," I said, "and your daughter will be too." She flushed. "You ruined her life." "She's 32, I said. "She has time to build a real one." I didn't say she ruined mine first. I didn't say I slept under a bridge. I didn't say I can still hear my IV pump when the house is too quiet. Revenge doesn't need a monologue in a parking lot. Revenge needs receipts and patience. Ethan asked if I'd ever forgive her. I don't use that word much. It's been handled so often in church basements that the edges have worn off. What I told him is what I believe. I don't want her. I don't hate her. I want the next person she would have hurt to be safe. That's enough. The restitution checks are small and irregular, more symbolic than satisfying. That's fine. I keep them in a separate account named, in my online banking app, House of Facts. When the balance gets silly enough, I buy something that stays bought. A better lock, a metal file cabinet with smooth rails, a fireproof safe with a bolted floor plate. Each purchase feels like laying brick. I keep in touch with the teachers who own my old place. They invited me over after everything was final. I stood in what used to be my kitchen and admired their cheap IKEA island like it was marble. The bougainvillea was climbing again, damming the HOA as God intended. I brought them a houseplant cutting from my new place and told them the trick to the irrigation timer. They cried. I did not. Pride and grief can sit in the same chair if you let them. Every Sunday, I drive by the bridge, not to torture myself, to take inventory. The city has moved folks out twice, and they creep back like weeds that are really just plants no one invited. I see faces I recognize. I leave bottled water in the shade of the pillar where I used to tuck my head. I put a laminated list under the lip of the concrete: where to get a replacement ID, how to freeze your credit, community legal services intake. It feels like pocket-sized justice. A month ago, I got a form letter from the Department of Corrections Victim Services Unit. It said I could submit a victim impact statement for Kari's parole packet someday. I put it in my file cabinet behind a tab that reads, K. If I ever write it, it will be short. You taught me how far kindness can be stretched before it breaks. I learned how to make it elastic again. I hope you learn the same.
Last week, I walked past the bus stop where I dropped those coins into her paper cup months ago. The corner was empty. A new poster on the shelter wall advertised a nonprofit that helps with deed fraud prevention. I laughed, out loud, not mean. The universe does love a callback. I still keep a spiral notebook. I still date the entries and underline in red when something matters. This morning's notes read, rent paid, ADRE revocation posted, Ethan changed the smoke alarm batteries, bougainvillea cutting rooting, and then, at the bottom, a line I wrote without thinking, I live here. That is the consequence, the ending, the moral. Not that she begged and I walked by without a word. Not that prison swallowed her and spat her out smaller. Not even that the state of Arizona stamped my pain with a case number. It's that I signed a new lease with my own hand, under my own name, with a notary who looked me in the eye, and I took the highlighter from her desk and colored the date like a child who finally gets to keep the picture she drew. Because in the end, the only revenge that doesn't sour is stability. HOA rules and all.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!